In February of 1954, a Navy pilot set out during a night training mission from a carrier off the coast of Japan. While he was taking off in stormy weather, his directional finder malfunctioned and he mistakenly headed in the wrong direction. To make matters worse, his instrument panel suddenly shorted out, burning out all the lights in the cockpit. The pilot looked around and could see absolutely nothing. The blackness outside had come inside his cockpit. Nearing despair, he looked down and he thought he saw this strange blue-green glow trailing along the ocean's depths. His training had prepared him for this moment, and he knew in an instant what he was seeing. A cloud of phosphorescent algae glowing in the sea that had been stirred up by the engine of his ship. It was the least reliable and most desperate method of piloting a plane back onto his ship safely. But that pilot, James Lovell, whom you may recognize as one of the astronauts on Apollo 13, that pilot knew exactly what he needed to do, and that's exactly what he did. He followed the trail of the algae and landed safely. Jim's life was saved that night because of light. Not just any light, but, and are you ready for this term? Bioluminescent dinoflagellates. There's a great one for a trivia game. They're actually tiny creatures that contain something called luciferin. It's a broad term to describe even what the tails of lightning bugs use to flash at night. Many of them live throughout the ocean. In the new year, we are going to be facing a host of choices and challenges, and sometimes we won't be quite sure what the right direction is to go. And so the Lord calls us to follow the light that we've been given, and He will provide the rest. Follow the light that we've already been given, and He will provide the rest. Do what you know to do, and He will let you know what comes next when you're not sure what to do. The passage that I read from Isaiah 42, I am the Lord, that is my name. I will not yield my glory to another or my praise to idols. See, the former things have taken place, and new things I declare. Before they spring into being, I announce them to you. The new thing that the Lord was about to do, as He prophesied from Isaiah, was to make salvation available to everyone, even, are you ready for this? Gentiles were going to be welcome into the kingdom. Do you know what January 6th is? This past Friday? We non-liturgical evangelicals don't put a lot of stock in the term epiphany. It's a Greek word that simply means a shining out. It was the first contact in which Gentiles recognized the uniqueness of Jesus. His light shone out into people that up to that point were considered a lost cause, Gentiles. These wise men were drawn to the light of Jesus by the light they had. Yes, it was part of their pagan practice, but through it, God gave them just enough light that if they were willing to follow that light, they would find the light. They weren't the only ones who had a difficult time just following what light they had. Joseph himself, good Jewish boy, grew up blue-collar man, but he was one of those kind of men that you knew you could trust because he trusted God. We could call him a godly man. He was following the light that he had, and so when it came time to get married and the woman he was engaged to turned out to be unfaithful apparently, he followed the light he had. He decided that rather than having her stoned, he would be gracious and simply have a quiet divorce. And that was the point at which he had come to the end of the light he had, and the Lord stepped in with new light. Marry her. Take Mary as your wife, because I've got something wondrous coming that's new. I wonder how often in his lifetime, especially those early years, Joseph said, "Why me?" This is something for people who really understand the Scriptures, who walk a lot better with God than I do. This is something for someone who's got more light than I do. And the Lord said, "You follow the light you have, and I'll give you what you need." In his dream, the angel said, "Go to Egypt and take Mary and Jesus." A bit more light. It can be stressful doing this thing of trusting the Lord for one day at a time. Back in the late 60s, two American psychologists came up with a stressor scale. It's called the Holmes-Ray Life Stressor Scale. And they assigned certain point values to extremely stressful versus less stressful items in life. This just gives you an idea of how they saw certain life events being stressful to people. And if you would total something over 355 points as events in your life that had happened, you could be pretty sure that illness was close by, because they were convinced that stress contributes to illness. We know that now. This was pioneering work at the time. Holmes and Ray looked at Mary and Joseph's situation and concluded that Mary and Joseph had a total count of 435 for their stress at this point in their lives. It's a wonder they weren't sick all the time. And yet, in spite of all the stress that Joseph was experiencing, he followed the light he knew, and the Lord provided what was next. That can be a challenging way to live, because we really do want to know what to expect so we can prepare for it. It's one of the reasons I hate following a semi, a tractor trailer. What's in front of that truck? What's coming? I want to be able to see it. Not only is it important for us to follow the light we have, be obedient to what we already know, and trust that God will provide what's next, the intent of our heart is just as important. How many of you have ever served on a jury? Would you raise your hand for a second? Was it one of the better experiences of your life? Has anyone here ever been part of a murder trial? One of the real challenges that a jury faces is trying to determine intent. That's why we have degrees of murder. One of the major differences between those degrees of murder is intent. What was on this person's mind when the fatal event happened? The Lord knows that when you are living this Christian life day to day, there will be days that you mess up and there will be days that you do well. And the point is not how badly you mess up, because He is always prepared to welcome you back and forgive when we simply ask. What He's looking for is the intent of your heart. Lord, I want to do it your way. I want to do it your way. Psalm 25 says, "Show me your ways, Lord. Teach me your paths. Guide me in your truth and teach me, for you are God, my Savior, and my hope is in you all day long." Psalm 40 says this, "Sacrifice and offering you did not require, you did not desire, but my ears you have opened." Some versions say there, "My ears you have pierced." Burnt offerings and sin offerings you did not require. Then I said, "Here I am, I have come. It is written about me in the scroll. I desire to do your will, my God. Your law is within my heart." The picture there is of a block. Instead of a head, there's a block with no ears. And the Lord is penetrating, piercing into those ears so that the person with the desire to know God's will, he will penetrate by his word to get that information into the heart. Harriet Tubman would never have won anything like a beauty contest in anybody's eyes. And yet, born into a slavery plantation in Maryland in 1822, she grew up driving oxen, trapping muskrats in the woods, being a nursemaid. As a slave, her owners frequently whipped her. And as she endured the pain of seeing 3 of her sisters sold, she never saw them again. But when her owner tried to sell one of her brothers, Harriet's mother openly rebelled. The would-be buyer gave up after Harriet's mother told him, "The first man that comes into my house, I'm going to split his head open." A woman not to mess with. Her mother's actions likely implanted in Harriet the idea that resisting evil was right and could sometimes be successful. As a child, Harriet herself would run away for days at a time, but there were rays of joy in her life as well. Harriet's mother told her stories from the Bible, which developed in Harriet a deep and abiding faith in God. And when Harriet was about 26 years old, she learned that she might be sold from her family. The time had come to escape. She made her way some 90 miles along the Underground Railroad. She traveled at night to avoid the slave catchers, and following the North Star, she reached Pennsylvania and freedom. And when she got there, she made a dangerous decision. She risked her own freedom in order to give others their freedom. And for the next 8 years, she led scores of slaves north to freedom. During these trips, she relied on God to guide and protect her, and she never once lost a runaway slave. As she put it herself, "I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger." And she gave the credit to God, saying, "'Twa'n't me, 'twas the Lord. I always told him, I trusts to you. I don't know where to go or what to do, but I expect you to lead me." And he always did. Abolitionist Thomas Garrett said, "I never met with another person of any color who had more confidence in the voice of God as spoken direct to her soul." Follow the light you already have. Do what you know to do, and the Lord will give you light for those next steps. There is one pernicious culprit that is determined to prevent you from seeing the light of the next step. It's something that we live with every single day, and there's not a one of us that is exempt from it. It has come to be a badge of honor in our society. For years, if you would greet someone, "How you doing?" the response would typically be, "Doing fine," or "Doing well," or "Not so great." Today, more typically than ever, when you ask someone how you're doing, The response is the one word, busy. I am so busy. And if you have the patience to listen, they'll tell you how busy they are. We've made busyness a virtue because we don't want to be identified as slackers, as lazy. The real difficulty is, remember the old Dutch phrase? Maybe you can finish it with me. The hurrier I go. Now, we've heard that for years, but we still are part of a culture that insists that busyness is better. The one way we will hear the voice of God and see that bit of light for the next step is when we day to day simply take the time. Nobody has the time. We must take the time to listen. Boy, that's a long 10 seconds when you don't have something to do or something to think about. Just listen. It doesn't have to be a half hour, but consistently daily taking the time to listen and making sure that everything else waits during those few moments. It is the way that Father brings light into our lives for the next step. Listening, investing that time in reading the Word, even a small portion, and then simply listening. It will never happen unless you choose to make it happen. Jim Lovell was able to land his plane safely because he had just enough light to do it. Harriet Tubman was able to rescue runaway slaves because she had just enough light from God to take them the next step. What's the next step for you in the coming year? I would love to hear about it from you as the Lord reveals it to you. Let's pray.